Here's something that I've always said about Trump, I guess, in my mind. I don't know if I've ever said this out loud. So fact check me on this. Have I ever said this on a Periscope? One of the best qualities of Trump in terms of strength of technique, so this is just a technique statement. One of his strongest strengths is simplification. And that's how he simplifies his messages. So build the wall, push China, stuff like that. So he's a really good simplifier. That's what makes you good at branding and marketing. It's what makes you a good persuader. So he's a simplifier. But there's a skill that goes into simplifying, and it's the bigger skill. And I've never seen Trump get credit for this. And when you hear it for the first time, you're going to say, oh, that's actually important. Here it is. If somebody is a good simplifier, they can tell what's important. That's the skill. The skill isn't simplification. The skill is knowing what's important so that when you get rid of all the other stuff, what's left is what's important. And you see that in everything Trump does. The funniest thing lately about Trump is there's a new book out, and I don't even know the title of it. Doesn't matter. So there's a new insider book, reportedly by some anonymous person about the inner workings of the White House and Trump. And it tries to make the case that he's impulsive and his decisions are impulsive, and that he won't read the briefings and stuff. Now, these are things we've heard before. But what's different about it is this. What's different about it is that Trump has been president for 3 years. So if you're looking at Trump's operating style, and it's so consistently reported that I will say it's probably true, that when people say he's impulsive, they're sort of reading his mind. You don't know what's going on in there. But let's just say he brings up topics that you weren't expecting. Now, to other people, that might look impulsive. But what they don't know is, how long has he been thinking about it? Has he talked to anybody else about it? If it's just the first time you hear him come up with an idea, hey, let's do X, and you've never been part of the conversation, what would you think of it? Would you think, well, we've never talked about this, you just threw this into conversation? It's impulsive. But how do you know? This could be something he's thought about for 20 years. Could be something he's had meetings with, he's talked to his casual advisors. Could be something he's been thinking about for a long time. You don't know what's in his head. You just know it's the first time you heard it. So to call that impulsive is mind reading, which is one of the things I talk about in Loser Think. And we get so accustomed to stuff like this that we start to believe that this mind reading is somehow a legitimate part of the news or a legitimate part of what we know about people. It's not. Nobody knows what's in his head. All you know is it's the first time you heard the idea. You don't know if it's impulsive. But then the other charge is that he doesn't read the briefing materials, the background stuff. Now, is that a problem? Well, you can imagine a situation in which it would be. It's easy to imagine that's a problem. But it's been 3 years. What problem has it caused? Name a problem. Can you tell me one problem that caused? I've never heard of one. So 3 years into it, is it still valid to talk about his management style? Think about it. Before he was president, was it valid to talk about his management style? Of course. Of course. In fact, it would be one of the most important things you could talk about. You'd want to talk about his character, his personality, his management style, his impulsiveness, whether he looks into the details, terribly important. And you want to look at those things and say, okay, a person with those qualities is likely to do a good or a bad job in your opinion. But now we're 3 years in. Those questions are irrelevant now because you can tell that the combination of his personality and his characteristics is either working or it's not. And obviously it's working. Unambiguously, it's working. So you have to ask yourself, how the heck does that work? How can he get good results being all impulsive and not looking into the details? Well, maybe that is the system. So here's something that I've always said about Trump, I guess in my mind. I don't know if I've ever said this out loud. So fact check me on this. Have I ever said this on a Periscope? One of the best qualities of Trump in terms of strength of technique, so this is just a technique statement. One of his strongest strengths is simplification. And that's how he simplifies his messages. So build the wall, push China, stuff like that. So he's a really good simplifier. That's what makes you good at branding and marketing. It's what makes you a good persuader. So he's a simplifier. But there's a skill that goes into simplifying, and it's the bigger skill. And I've never seen Trump get credit for this. And when you hear it for the first time, you're going to say, oh, that's actually important. Here it is. If somebody is a good simplifier, they can tell what's important. That's the skill. The skill isn't simplification. The skill is knowing what's important so that when you get rid of all the other stuff, what's left is what's important. And you see that in everything Trump does. So when he was running, people said, hey, you can't spend this little money and run for president. Apparently he knew that spending a lot of money wasn't important in his case because he got a lot of free press. Hillary Clinton did not campaign enough in the battleground states. She didn't think that was important, at least in the context of her campaign. Trump campaigned in the right places to win the Electoral College because he knew what was important. So Trump consistently looks into complexity and pulls out the stuff that's important. That is such a superpower, and it's also invisible to people who aren't looking for it. All you see is sort of what he says and what he's doing. You don't have any sense that just before that was all the smart stuff. The smart stuff is what's worth talking about and what do I throw away. Do you think his decisions would have been substantially better if he read background reports? Probably not. What would have been different about the way we're negotiating with China? Nothing. What would be different about the way we're dealing with North Korea? What would be different about the way he handled taxes? What would be different about anything? He apparently knows how to get to the central truth of things without all the garbage. So let me put it in starker terms. The people who are complaining about the president not reading their little background reports are people who don't know how to tell what's important. That's why they have those jobs, because they can't tell what's important, not at the same level that a top leader can. They think everything's important, so they put it in a report, and they put it on the leader's desk, and the leader, who's good at it, who can tell the difference between what's important and what's not, just picks it up and says, okay, yeah, China, I got it covered. Get back to me. So we have never seen any specific problem that's caused because Trump did not read some document. One assumes that every time that Trump says in a meeting with his advisors, if he says, hey, I've got an idea, let's try X, at that point, when the president tosses out an idea, the smart people who have read the background material, because they should, they're the advisors, say, oops, there's something you don't know, that idea won't work, there's something in the background report that says why, it's because of X. And then the president, presumably, I'm not in the room, but this would be the normal way that anybody would manage. And the president would hear that and say, are you sure about that? The advisor says yes. President makes a judgment about the person. Is that a person who tells me the right things? Is it a person with good judgment? Is it a person who knows what he's talking about? Yes. Did they just give me a good reason that makes my idea not practical? Yes. Let's move on. He doesn't need to read the background materials. Indeed, his ability to avoid the details is probably one of his best qualities, because he seems to be able to run things with any of that. Take an example of selecting Supreme Court justices. The way other presidents did it, I guess, is they looked at each justice and they listened to people's arguments or whatever, and then they picked one. What Trump did is he found an organization that is respected for selecting potential Supreme Court people, and then he told the public, I'm going to pick something from that list. Definitely. Eventually that was his message. He said, it's definitely going to be from this list. Who's on the list, Mr. President? I don't know. Now, that's not quite true, because he actually knew some of the personalities on the list from, he's known them for a long time, heard about them, etc. So he did know something about a number of the people on the list. But he didn't need to know much. He just needed to know that everyone agreed, everyone being conservatives, they agreed that the organization that made the list does a real good job of picking judges that are conservative and qualified for the court. That's all he needed to know. Hey, there's a respectable company or organization, they make a list, I'll pick from the list. So you can't get much simpler than that. And how's it worked out? Really, really well for conservatives. So my point is that it just looks, it looks inexperienced for somebody to look at a book about Trump's management style and characteristics, his impulsiveness and stuff, and judge that it's not working, because it's clearly working, and it might even be the model. Remember, they said the same thing about Reagan, and I think Reagan had the same quality, which is Reagan might not have been the smartest guy in the world, but he could sure tell what was important. He had a knack for getting to the hardest stuff.